I moved out in silence, leaving no arguments behind, only empty rooms. Hours later, my sister posted a photo online captioned, "Finally, the freeloader is gone." Instead of fighting back, I loved every brutal comment. I needed them arrogant. I needed them to feel like winners so they would walk right into the trap they built. They have no idea the house never belonged to them. This time, the paperwork does not favor family. My name is Madeline Richardson, and at 34 years of age, I learned that the most dangerous thing a person can do is leave a war zone without making a sound. It was 7 in the morning in Maple Ridge, a pristine subdivision on the outskirts of Charlotte, where the Homeowners Association measured the height of your grass with a ruler but completely ignored the screaming matches happening behind the double-paned glass. The morning mist was still clinging to the perfectly manicured hydrangeas as I carried the last box to my car. I did not slam the front door. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not scream at the people sleeping upstairs to wake up and acknowledge that I was leaving. I simply closed the door until the latch clicked. A soft, metallic sound that felt like the final period at the end of a very long, very poorly written sentence. I treated the move like a tactical extraction. My Honda Civic was packed with the precision of a Tetris game, boxes of books and clothes wedged tight against the windows. I looked back at the house one last time. It was a sprawling colonial revival with white pillars and black shutters, the kind of house that appeared on postcards for the American dream. It was beautiful, it was imposing, and it was occupied by the 3 ugliest souls I had ever known. I put the car in drive and rolled down the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove 3 miles to a coffee shop parking lot near the interstate, turned off the engine, and waited. I knew it would not take long. My sister, Kayla, lived her entire life for the dopamine hit of a notification. She woke up scrolling and fell asleep posting. My phone buzzed against the center console at 9:15. It was a Facebook tag. I picked up the device, the screen glowing bright in the dim interior of my car. There it was, a photo of my now empty bedroom, the door wide open, sunlight streaming onto the bare carpet. Kayla had not even waited for the dust to settle. The caption was short, brutal, and designed for maximum engagement. "Finally, the freeloader is gone. New chapter for this family." I sat there, sipping cold coffee, and watched the numbers climb. In the span of 20 minutes, the post had garnered over 200 likes. It was a masterclass in social manipulation. To the outside world, to the neighbors in Maple Ridge and the church group and the extended cousins in Raleigh, this was a celebration of liberation. Kayla was framing my departure as the removal of a tumor. I scrolled down to the comments. This was the battlefield, and I was the casualty. My mother, Brenda, was the first to comment. Her profile picture was a heavily filtered selfie of her and Kayla smiling at a winery. Her comment read, "So proud of us for reclaiming our space. It has been a long, hard road, but peace is finally here." I felt a cold, sharp pang in my chest, but I did not let it reach my face. A long, hard road, as if my existence, my quiet contributions, my invisibility, had been a burden she had heroically endured. Then I saw my father's contribution. Graham did not write anything. He never did. He preferred to let the women in his life do the dirty work while he reaped the benefits of their cruelty. He had simply navigated to a comment from one of Kayla's high school friends that said, "About time she grew up and stopped leeching off you guys." And he had hit the like button. That single like from my father hurt more than the paragraphs of venom from my mother and sister. It was a silent endorsement. It was a digital nod of agreement that I was, indeed, a parasite, the old Madeline, the one who lived in that guest room and walked on eggshells to avoid cracking the family's fragile ego. Would have cried. She would have typed out a furious defense, detailing every grocery bill she had paid, every time she had cleaned the gutters, every night she had stayed silent while they spent money they did not have. She would have tried to prove her worth to people committed to misunderstanding her, but the Madeline sitting in the parking lot did not cry. I did not type a rebuttal. I did not block them. Instead, I went to work. My finger hovered over the reaction button on my mother's comment. I did not choose the angry face. I did not choose the sad face. I chose the heart. I moved to Kayla's post. Heart. I scrolled to the comment my father had liked, the one calling me a leech. Heart. I went down the list, methodically, rhythmically. Every insult, every snide remark from a neighbor, every LOL from a distant relative. I loved them all. I flooded their notifications with affection. It was a behavior so contradictory, so bizarre, that it would force them to pause. Why is she liking this? Is she crazy? Is she being sarcastic? Does she not understand we are mocking her? I wanted them confused. More importantly, I wanted them arrogant. I needed them to believe that I was broken, that I had accepted their narrative, that I was smiling through the pain because I had no other option. I needed them to feel safe. When people feel safe, they get sloppy. They stop looking over their shoulders. They sign papers they should not sign. They spend money they do not own. I watched the engagement on the post spike. My notifications were a stream of confusion, but I did not stop until I had hearted every single act of betrayal. I was checking off names on a list, not for revenge in the traditional sense, but for witnessing. I wanted to remember exactly who stood where when the floor fell out. Once the task was done, I set the phone down on the passenger seat. My hands were steady. The air in the car felt lighter, cleaner. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I did not need Wi-Fi for this. The files were saved locally, buried deep in a folder labeled Taxes 2022, nested inside another folder, protected by a password that was 16 characters long. I typed it in. The screen flickered, revealing 3 PDF files that I had scanned years ago. Deed of Trust. Last Will and Testament of Walter Price. Correspondence. Attorney General. I opened the deed first. The screen displayed the scanned image of the aged paper, the official stamps of the county clerk, and the signature at the bottom. It was not Graham Monroe. It was not Brenda Monroe. And it certainly was not Kayla Monroe. They called me a freeloader. They told the world I was living in their house, eating their food, using their air. They truly believed it because they had told themselves the lie for so long that it had calcified into truth. They thought they had just evicted a squatter. I looked at the house on the hill in my mind, the one with the white pillars and the black shutters. They were celebrating tonight. They were probably opening a bottle of wine, laughing about how easy it was to finally push me out, feeling the rush of victory. They had no idea. I closed the laptop and started the car. I was not just moving out. I was yielding the battlefield so the enemy could march forward. Straight into the minefield they had forgotten was there. They thought they had just gotten rid of a freeloader, but the reality was far colder. They had just signed the expiration date on their own lives. To understand why I lit the match by liking those comments, you have to understand the flammable gas that had been leaking into that house for years. The Monroes were not just a family, they were a carefully curated brand of suburban martyrdom. To the outside world, they were the salt of the earth. Hard-working people doing their best in a tough economy, inside the walls of Maple Ridge. However, we were operating under a strict caste system, and everyone had their role to play. Kayla was the sun around which the household orbited. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when she was doing absolutely nothing. She did not have a career so much as she had a series of passionate announcements. She was going to be a real estate agent, then a lifestyle coach, then an influencer. The house was her studio. She treated the living room like a stage set. If the throw pillows were not aligned perfectly for her morning story, she would scream until the veins in her neck bulged. She loved the aesthetics of a happy home, the granite countertops and the farmhouse sink, but she hated the maintenance of it. She wanted the picture of the gourmet dinner on Instagram, but she left the dirty pans in the sink for 3 days until they grew a layer of fuzz. I was the designated failure. Every functional ecosystem needs a bottom feeder to clean the tank. And that was me. They called me a shut-in. They called me antisocial, because I spent 8 to 10 hours a day in my room with the door closed. They assumed I was wasting my life. to Brenda and Graham. Work was something you did with your hands or something that required a name tag. If you were not standing on your feet for 8 hours complaining about a manager, you were not really working. I remember one afternoon vividly. I was in the middle of a complex compliance audit for a client, staring at 2 monitors filled with spreadsheets and regulatory codes. Brenda kicked my door open without knocking, a laundry basket on her hip. She looked at my screens, then at me, and sighed with a mixture of pity and annoyance. She asked me if I was still playing my little computer games. I tried to explain, for the 100th time, that I was reviewing financial adherence protocols for a mid-sized firm in Chicago. I told her I was billing them by the hour. She just rolled her eyes and started picking up socks from the floor, making a show of how burdened she was. She told me that real work made you tired. She said real work had a uniform. Then she asked me to empty the dishwasher because she had been on her feet all day at the boutique, implying that my day had been a vacation. That was the narrative. Madeline is lazy. Madeline plays on her laptop. Madeline does not understand the value of $1. The irony of that last sentiment was sharp enough to draw blood. Brenda was the most emotional spender I had ever met. She treated money like a mood stabilizer. If she had a bad day, she bought decorative gourds. If she had a good day, she bought shoes she would never wear. The front porch was a revolving door of delivery boxes, brown cardboard piled up in the recycling bin like evidence of a crime. Yet, every Sunday night at dinner, the conversation would turn to how tight the budget was. Brenda would sigh dramatically and talk about sacrifices, about how they were barely scraping by, glancing at me as if my existence was the line item that was breaking the bank. Graham played his part in this farce by being the ostrich. He loved the idea of being the provider, the strong patriarch who kept the roof over our heads, but he was terrified of the actual mechanics of ownership. He never opened the mail. He never looked at the utility rates. As long as the lights turned on when he flipped the switch, he did not want to know how it happened or who ensured the bill was paid. He let Brenda handle the finances, which was like letting a pyromaniac guard the firewood. He sat at the head of the table, nodding along to Brenda's complaints, agreeing that times were tough, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had spent $300 on seasonal wreaths that morning. I learned to survive by becoming a ghost in my own residence. I stopped eating their food when I was 22. I realized that every slice of bread I consumed was being tallied in a mental ledger to be used against me later. So, I bought my own groceries. I cleared a single shelf in the refrigerator and defended it quietly. I cooked when they were watching television. I did my laundry at 2 a.m. I bought my own toiletries, my own towels, my own light bulbs for my room. I became a tenant who paid in invisibility. I avoided common areas. If I heard Kayla recording a video in the kitchen, talking about her morning routine and how blessed she was, I would wait in my room until she was done. If I heard Graham and Brenda arguing about money in the den, I would put on noise-canceling headphones. I walked softly. I closed doors gently. I tried to occupy 0% of the space so they could have 100% of their delusion. They interpreted this distance as arrogance. They thought I was better than them. When I bought a decent pair of noise-canceling headphones, Kayla scoffed and said it must be nice to have money to burn on toys. She said this while wearing a designer watch she had put on a credit card she could not pay off. But the biggest secret, the one that I kept locked tighter than the files on my computer, was the annual transaction, every year, on the 5th of January. I sat at my desk and made a bank transfer. It was a significant sum. It was not rent. Rent is what you pay to a landlord for the privilege of temporary shelter. This was something else. I never labeled it as rent in the transaction notes. I simply labeled it Annual Maintenance Equity Preservation. Brenda and Graham saw the money hit their joint account every January, and they never asked what it was for. They just assumed it was my penance. They assumed it was the freeloader paying a chaotic, lump sum tax for the burden of existing in their beautiful home. They spent it immediately. Usually, it went to pay off the credit card debt Brenda had racked up over Christmas, or it went toward a vacation they felt they deserved. They never questioned the amount. They never questioned the timing. And they certainly never questioned why I insisted on doing it via direct bank transfer rather than writing a check or handing them cash. They were just happy to have the liquidity. If they had been paying attention, if they had ever looked at the county records or the original paperwork from when we moved in, they might have realized that the amount I transferred matched. To the penny, the property tax assessment and the insurance premium for the entire estate. They thought I was contributing to the household expenses. They did not understand that I was not paying them. I was maintaining the asset. I was not a tenant paying a landlord. I was a CEO, funding a failing subsidiary to keep it from going bankrupt, waiting for the day I would have to dissolve the partnership. They saw a daughter who wouldn't get a real job. I saw 3 people living inside a corporate entity they did not know they didn't own. And every time they mocked me for staying in my room, every time they called me a leech, I just thought about that transfer receipt, saved and backed up. Another brick in the wall of evidence I was building around them. So when I walked out that door, I was not just leaving a house, I was stopping the cash flow. The tragedy was not that I left. The tragedy was that they honestly believed they could afford the lifestyle I had been quietly subsidizing for a decade. They were like children playing house in a mansion, unaware that the power was about to be cut. To understand the architecture of this trap, we have to go back 24 years to the day we moved into Maple Ridge. I was 10 years old. The house was not purchased by Graham's hard work or Brenda's budgeting skills. It was acquired by my maternal grandfather, Walter Price. Walter was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain to harden. He made his money in logistics, moving heavy things across long distances for people who did not want to sweat. He hated waste. He hated noise. And most of all, he hated the performance of wealth that his daughter, Brenda, had perfected. He loved me, I think, because I was the only person in the family who knew how to sit in a room without needing to be the center of it. He used to tell me that silence was the only thing you could own that no one could tax. When Walter died, I was 26. The funeral was a theatrical production directed by Brenda. She wore a black dress that cost more than my first car and wept loudly into a lace handkerchief whenever anyone was looking, but I knew the frequency of those tears. She was not crying because she had lost her father. She was crying because she was terrified she had lost her financier. Graham stood by her side, looking solemn, but I saw him checking his watch, calculating how long until the reading of the will. We gathered in the attorney's office 3 days after the burial. It was a room that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The attorney was a man named Mr. Henderson, who had the same flinty eyes as my grandfather. He sat behind a desk that looked like a barricade. Brenda and Graham sat in the center chairs, holding hands, presenting a united front of expectant grief. Kayla, who was 20 at the time, was texting under the table. I sat in the corner, on a folding chair, feeling like an intruder in my own family's history. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He did not look at Brenda. He did not look at Graham. He looked directly at me. He began to read. There were small bequests for cousins, a donation to a veterans hospital, and then came the matter of the primary asset, the house at Maple Ridge. Brenda straightened her spine. She squeezed Graham's hand. I could practically hear her mental calculator clicking, allocating the equity she was about to inherit. She was probably already planning the kitchen remodel. Mr. Henderson slid a thick bound document across the mahogany desk, but he did not slide it toward Brenda. He slid it toward me. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Brenda laughed. It was a sharp, nervous sound. She reached out to intercept the folder, her manicured nails clicking on the leather binding. She told Mr. Henderson that there must be a mistake and that she would take that. Mr. Henderson placed his hand over the file. He told her, very calmly, that there was no mistake. He stated that the property at Maple Ridge was not part of the distributable estate. It had been placed into the Price Family Trust 5 years prior. Brenda blinked. She asked what that meant. Mr. Henderson explained that the title to the house was held by the trust, and the sole beneficiary of that trust, the person with the exclusive right to determine the disposition of the asset, was Madeline Richardson. I remember the feeling of the room spinning. I stared at the folder. My name was typed on the cover in bold, black letters. I was 26, working an entry-level job, still living in that house because I could not afford rent elsewhere. And suddenly, I held the keys to the kingdom. Brenda went through the 5 stages of grief in under 30 seconds. First was denial. She looked at Graham and asked if this was a joke. Then came anger. She turned on Mr. Henderson and asked how her father could do this to his own child. Then came bargaining. She turned to me. Her face softened into a mask of maternal concern that I recognized instantly as a weapon. She told me that grandfather was old and confused at the end. She said he probably didn't understand the legal jargon. She said that, obviously, the house was for the family, and I was just the technical name on the paper to save on inheritance taxes. Mr. Henderson cut her off. He adjusted his glasses and read from the document. He said that Walter Price was of sound mind and specific intent. He read the conditions of the trust aloud. Clause 1 stated that the immediate family, Brenda, Graham, and Kayla, were granted a revocable right of occupancy. They were allowed to live there. Clause 2 stated that this right was contingent upon 3 things. First, they had to maintain the property. Second, they had to cover all utility and operational costs. And then, he read Clause 3. The right of occupancy may be revoked immediately if the occupants engage in conduct that is disrespectful, abusive, or damaging to the reputation of the beneficiary. The room went dead silent. Walter had reached out from the grave and slapped them across the face. He knew them. He knew exactly who they were. He knew that if he gave them the house, they would sell it or mortgage it to fund their vanity. And he knew that if he left me with nothing, they would eat me alive. Brenda's face turned a color I had never seen before. It was a mix of purple and gray. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw pure hatred. But then, just as quickly, the mask slid back into place. She smiled. It was a terrifying, tight smile. She told me that it didn't matter what the paper said. She said we were family. She said that family does not do legal contracts with each other. She told me to just sign whatever needed to be signed so we could go home and have dinner. She framed it as if I were doing them a favor by letting them handle the burden of the house. I was 26. I was conditioned to please them. I was used to being the doormat. I looked at the lawyer, and I saw him shake his head slightly, a microscopic warning. But I looked at my mother, and I felt that old, sickening desire to just make the tension stop. So I nodded. I did not evict them. I did not assert my dominance. I let them drive home believing that the trust was just a formality. I let them take the master bedroom. I let them treat me like a guest in my own property. I let Brenda tell people it was her house. I let Graham play the lord of the manor, but I kept the folder. Mr. Henderson had pulled me aside as we were leaving. He handed me a second envelope, thinner than the first. He told me that Walter had left me a specific instruction. He called it a dead man's switch. He said that Walter knew I was too kind for my own good, so he had built a trapdoor into the legal framework. He told me that if the day ever came when they forgot who really held the power, all I had to do was file one specific document with the county clerk, and the protection of the trust would harden into an eviction order. I took that envelope and locked it away. I spent 8 years paying the taxes and the insurance because I knew they wouldn't. I spent 8 years letting them call me a freeloader. Knowing that I was the only reason they had a roof over their heads, I thought I would never use it. I thought that maybe, just maybe, they would eventually treat me with decency. But then came the Facebook post. Then came the freeloader comment. Then came the likes. They had violated Clause 3. They had publicly damaged the reputation of the beneficiary. They thought the house was theirs because they had lived there for 20 years. They forgot that tenancy is not ownership. They forgot that Walter Price hated moochers, and he had defined moocher very differently than they did. They thought they were the landlords of my life. They were about to find out they were just guests who had overstayed their welcome, and the checkout time was written in ink that had dried a long time ago. The gap between who my family thought I was and who I actually was could have swallowed that entire house whole. To Brenda, Graham, and Kayla. My time behind a closed door was spent indulging in adolescent laziness. They imagined I was scrolling through memes, playing video games, or perhaps napping. The reality was far more boring and significantly more profitable. I am a senior compliance strategist and UX writer. It is a title that sounds dry enough to make eyes glaze over at a dinner party, which was exactly why I liked it. I worked as a contractor for a company called North Star Meridian Solutions. They specialized in crisis management and regulatory alignment for fintech startups. My job was to take complex, terrifying legal requirements and translate them into user interfaces that did not make customers run for the hills. It required a forensic attention to detail and an obsession with wording, skills that, as it turned out, were perfectly transferable to dismantling a toxic family dynamic. I did not wear a suit. I did not commute. I worked in sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, usually with a cup of lukewarm tea on my desk, because I did not perform the theater of going to work. My family assumed I was unemployed. I never corrected them. When Brenda asked if I had found a real job yet, I would just shrug and say, I picked up a few gigs here and there. They did not need to know that my gigs paid me a retainer that rivaled Graham's annual salary. They did not need to know that I had a dedicated accountant named Sarah who handled my quarterly taxes with ruthless efficiency. They certainly did not need to know about the escape fund. I had been building the escape fund for 4 years. It was not just a savings account. It was a fortress. I had 12 months of living expenses sitting in a high-yield tiered interest account. I had a Roth IRA that I maxed out every single year on the 1st of January. While Kayla was buying followers for her Instagram and Brenda was financing a new dining set at 24% interest. I was compounding my freedom. I learned the necessity of this silence the hard way. 2 years ago, I dated a man named David. He was kind, ambitious, and traditional. I made the mistake of bringing him home. I made the bigger mistake of letting him listen to my family. Over Sunday dinners, Brenda would make her little jokes. She would laugh about how I was a late bloomer. Kayla would chime in, asking David if he didn't mind dating someone who lacked drive. Graham would just sigh. The long-suffering father. Slowly, David's gaze changed. He stopped asking me about my projects. He started making subtle comments about responsibility and growing up. When he broke up with me, he did it in the driveway. He told me that he needed a partner who was his equal, not a project. He said I was stuck in arrested development, and he could not wait for me to catch up. I stood there and watched his taillights fade. I could have shown him my bank balance. I could have shown him my client list. I could have proved him wrong in 10 seconds. But I realized then that if he was willing to believe the caricature my family drew of me, rather than the woman standing in front of him, he was not the one. My family used the breakup as ammunition. Brenda told me it was a wake-up call. She said, "See? Even David could see you aren't pulling your weight." That was the day the last piece of my emotional attachment to them died. I stopped trying to explain myself. I adopted a technique I later learned was called gray rocking. When they baited me, I became as boring and unreactive as a stone. "You're still in your pajamas at noon?" "Yes. Kayla just got a brand collaboration with a tea company." "That is nice. When are you going to do something with your life?" "I am figuring it out." I denied them the fuel of my reaction, and while they were busy poking the rock, they did not notice that the rock was recording everything. One of the most critical pieces of my strategy involved the household utilities. Years ago, when we first transitioned to digital billing, Brenda threw a fit. She claimed she was bad with logins and that technology gave her a migraine. She shoved the bills for the electricity, the gas, the high-speed fiber internet, and the home security system across the table to me. "You're good with computers," she had said. "You set it up. We'll just pay you back." So I did. I put everything in my name. The account at Pine State Electric, Madeline Richardson. The account at Blue River Gas, Madeline Richardson. The contract with Sunline Fiber, Madeline Richardson. For the first few months, they Venmo'd me their share, albeit late. Then, The payments became sporadic. Then, they stopped altogether, whenever I brought it up. Brenda would wave her hand and say, "Put it on the tab. We feed you, don't we?" I never argued. I simply paid the bills. To them, I was a pushover. To me, I was acquiring leverage. Legally, those services belonged to me. I controlled the flow of heat, light, and information into that house. I began to archive everything. I created a digital vault. Every time Brenda texted me a passive-aggressive request for money, I screenshot it. Every time Kayla posted a video showing off a new renovation that I had paid for, I saved it. I downloaded every utility bill for the last 5 years, highlighting the dates and the fact that the payments came solely from my personal checking account. I wasn't building a revenge plot. I was building a defense case. My goal was not to scream and shout. My goal was to have a pile of evidence so high that when I finally walked away, no amount of lying could bury the truth. I wanted to make sure that when the narrative shifted, I had the receipts to shift it back. 3 months before I moved out, I took the final step. I didn't look for a rental. I looked for a purchase. I found a condo in a quiet, older building downtown. It was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, exposed brick, no lawn to mow. It was perfect. I went through the entire closing process digitally. I signed the mortgage papers on my laptop in my bedroom while Kayla was filming a room tour down the hall. When the realtor handed me the keys, I put them in the bottom of my bag, underneath my laptop charger. The metal felt cold and heavy. It was the weight of a secret life. I would go to the condo on weekends, telling my family I was going to the library or a coffee shop. I moved small things over slowly. Books, winter coats, sentimental items they would never notice were missing. I would sit in the middle of the empty living room floor in that condo and just listen. I listened to the traffic outside. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator. But mostly, I listened to the absence of criticism. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was the loser daughter with nowhere to go. They had no idea that I owned property 20 minutes away. They had no idea that the freeloader was the only person in the house with a positive net worth, a retirement plan, and a set of keys to a door they could not open. I was not just surviving them, I was outgrowing them in silence, preparing for the day I would prune the dead weight from my life, and that day was coming faster than they could possibly imagine. The Tuesday I chose for my extraction was supposed to be a ghost town. According to the family calendar, an oversized whiteboard in the kitchen that Brenda color-coded with the intensity of an air traffic controller, everyone had places to be. Graham had a golf tee time at 9. Brenda had a brunch and a hair appointment. Kayla had a content creation day scheduled with a friend across town. The house should have been empty until 4 in the afternoon. I had rented a 10-foot box truck, parked it down the street, and waited until the last car pulled out of the driveway before bringing it up. I moved with the efficiency of a pit crew. I did not have much. My furniture was mostly cheap particle board I did not care to keep. I only packed what mattered: my clothes, my books, my hard drives, the folder with the trust documents. I was on my last trip, carrying a box of winter coats. When I heard the crunch of gravel behind me, my stomach dropped. I turned to see Brenda's Audi Q5 pulling into the driveway, followed closely by Kayla's white Jeep. They were back 3 hours early. The universe, it seemed, wanted a show. Brenda stepped out of the car first. She was wearing her oversized sunglasses and holding a Starbucks cup. She stopped dead when she saw the truck. She looked at the vehicle, then at me, then back at the truck. Her expression was not sadness. It was not confusion. It was the look of a manager discovering an employee stealing office supplies. She walked up the driveway, her heels clicking on the pavement. She did not ask where I was going. She did not ask why I was leaving. "Who is paying for that truck?" she asked. That was her first question. Not "Madeline, are you okay?" but "Who gave you the money?" In Brenda's mind, I was a financial infant. The idea that I could rent a vehicle on my own was as foreign to her as quantum physics. She assumed I had stolen a credit card or beguiled some poor man. I paid for it, I said, sliding the box into the back of the truck and pulling down the metal shutter halfway. Kayla was out of her Jeep now. Her radar for drama was impeccable. She already had her phone in her hand, the camera app open. She held it at chest level, subtly filming, her thumb hovering over the record button. You paid for it? Kayla laughed, a sharp, performative sound. With what? Did you cash in your birthday money from Grandma? Graham emerged from the passenger seat of the Audi. He looked tired. He hated confrontation that he could not solve with a grunt or a check. He stood by the garage door, arms crossed, leaning against the siding like a silent bailiff in a family court. I have a job, Kayla, I said. My voice was even. I was not shouting. I was practicing the gray rock method, even in the final minutes. I have had a job for 5 years. Brenda let out a sigh that rattled her jewelry. She walked closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive vanilla perfume. Don't lie to us. Madeline, this is ridiculous. You're having an episode. Is this about what I said regarding the dishwasher yesterday? Because this is a very expensive temper tantrum. It is not a tantrum, I said. I am moving out. Today. Right now. You can't afford to move out, Brenda snapped. Do you have any idea what rent costs in this city? You'll be back in a week begging for your room back. And let me tell you, when you come crawling back, we are going to have a serious discussion about rent. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The woman standing on the driveway of a house she did not own. Lecturing the actual owner about the cost of living was a level of delusion that was almost impressive. I won't be coming back, I said. Kayla stepped forward, panning her phone camera between me and the truck. So where are you going? A shelter? Or did you find some guy online? It does not matter, I said. I walked past them to the driver's side of the truck. Brenda grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You are being selfish, she hissed. After everything we have done for you, we put a roof over your head. We fed you. We tolerated your moods. And you just leave without a word? Who does that? I looked down at her hand on my arm. I thought about the bills I had paid. I thought about the property taxes. I thought about the years of being the punchline to their jokes. I am grateful for the lessons, I said, and I meant it. They had taught me exactly what not to be. I pulled my arm away gently. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Graham. Kayla. I climbed into the cab of the truck. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and pine air freshener. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, drowning out whatever Brenda was shouting next. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them standing there, a tableau of suburban dysfunction. Brenda was gesturing wildly, Graham was staring at his shoes, and Kayla was typing furiously on her phone. They looked like statues in a museum of bad behavior. I drove down the street, watching the house shrink in the side mirror until the white pillars disappeared behind the oak trees. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I drove for 10 minutes before I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot to drop off the truck keys and pick up my car. I sat there for a moment, waiting for the feeling of freedom to hit me. I expected euphoria. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. Then, my phone buzzed. I picked it up. It was the notification. Kayla Monroe mentioned you in a post. I opened it. The picture of my empty room. The caption. Finally. The freeloader is gone. I sat there and read it. I read Brenda's comment about reclaiming their space. I read the neighbors' comments. I saw the likes rolling in. A normal person would have commented immediately. A normal person would have posted a picture of their bank account or the deed to the house and burned them to the ground right then and there. But I was not feeling normal. I was feeling surgical. If I reacted now, it would just be a family squabble. It would be, he said, she said. They would spin it. They would say I was lying, or that I was ungrateful. No, I needed something more permanent. I looked at the date on my phone. I decided to give them a week. 7 days. In the Bible, 7 days was enough time to create a world. I figured it was just enough time for my family to destroy theirs. I would let them have their victory lap. I would let them tell everyone in town that I was gone. I would let them throw a party. I would let them bask in the silence of the house, thinking they had won, because the higher they climbed on their pedestal of self-righteousness, the harder the fall would be when I pulled the rug out. I put the phone down, started my car, and drove toward my new condo. I had 7 days to prepare the paperwork. I had 7 days to let them dig their own grave, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the silence before the storm. On the 7th day, the silence ended. I had given them exactly 168 hours to celebrate their victory. I imagined them walking through the hallways, spreading their arms in the empty space, telling themselves that the air felt lighter without me. They probably toasted to their resilience. They probably told the neighbors that I had stormed off in a fit of instability and that they were praying for me. On Tuesday morning, sitting at a glass desk in my downtown condo, I pressed print. The laser printer hummed, a rhythmic, mechanical sound that felt like a gavel striking a block. I was not writing a tearful letter about my feelings. I was not asking for an apology. I was generating a legal packet. Page 1 was the deed of trust, highlighting the section that named the Price Family Trust as the sole owner. Page 2 was the beneficiary designation, naming Madeline Richardson as the sole controlling party. Page 3 was a spreadsheet, color-coded and itemized, detailing 5 years of property taxes, insurance premiums, and major repairs, all paid from my personal account. The total at the bottom was a 6-figure sum that would make a loan officer weep. Page 4 was a screenshot of Kayla's Facebook post. Finally, the freeloader is gone, and then there was the cover letter. I wrote it in the third person. I stripped it of all familial warmth. It addressed them not as Mom, Dad, and Kayla, but as the current occupants. The terms were simple. Since the dynamic of the household had changed, and since they had publicly declared me a separate entity from the family unit, the informal arrangement of their residency was hereby terminated. I offered them 2 distinct paths, formatted clearly with checkboxes. Option A: enter into a standard month-to-month lease agreement. The rent would be set at fair market value for a 4-bedroom colonial in Maple Ridge. I had done the comps. The number was $3,200 a month, excluding utilities. Option B: vacate the premises within 30 days, leaving the property in broom-swept condition. Then came the kicker. I added a paragraph regarding the utilities. I informed them that all services currently in my name, electricity, gas, water, internet, were scheduled for disconnection in exactly 48 hours unless they transferred the accounts into their own names. I was done subsidizing the lights they used to see their own lies. Finally, I referenced the morality clause of the trust. I cited the specific language regarding conduct damaging to the reputation of the beneficiary. I attached the screenshot of the Facebook post as Exhibit A. I explained, in cool, neutral legal speak, that publicly labeling the property owner a freeloader constituted a breach of the respect required for continued gratuitous occupancy. I placed the stack of papers into a stiff cardboard envelope. I drove to the post office and paid extra for certified mail with a return receipt requested. I wanted the signature. I wanted the timestamp. I wanted proof that Graham or Brenda had to physically sign for the reality check I was delivering. I also scanned the entire packet and emailed it to all 3 of them at noon. The reaction was not immediate. I knew they did not check their email often, and the mail carrier would not arrive until 3 in the afternoon. I went about my workday. I had a conference call with a client in Seattle. I ate a salad. I watched the clock. At 3:45, my phone, which I had placed face down on the counter, began to vibrate. It did not stop. First it was Brenda, then Graham, then Brenda again, then a FaceTime request from Kayla, then a barrage of text messages. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up, the names flashing like a distress signal from a sinking ship. Pick up the phone. Is this a joke? You are trying to kill your mother. Call me right now. Madeline, this is evil. Who put you up to this? Did that lawyer brainwash you? 22 missed calls in 15 minutes. They were panicking. They were not panicking because they missed me. They were panicking because they had done the math. They knew they did not have $3,200 a month. They knew they could not pass a credit check to transfer the utilities. At 4:30, a text came through from Kayla. It was different from the frantic rage of our mother. It was the slippery, gaslighting tone she used on her followers. Maddie. OMG, stop being so dramatic. The post was just a joke. It's dark humor. Everyone knows I love you. You can't evict your own family over a Facebook caption. Be serious. I stared at the message. Just a joke. That was their shield. Whenever they drew blood, it was a joke. Whenever they shattered someone's confidence, it was satire. They demanded the freedom to be cruel, but refused to accept the consequence of being heard. I typed a response. I kept it surgical. If it is a joke, then you do not need my house to live in. I hit send. Then I blocked her for 24 hours. I needed to clear my head. So I opened my laptop to double-check the utility transfer dates. I wanted to make sure there was no gap that could leave me liable. I logged into the cloud drive where I kept the scanned archives of the house documents. As I was scrolling through the folder labeled Structure and Liens, looking for the original heater warranty, my eye caught a file name I did not recognize. It was a PDF labeled modification_inquiry_2024. I frowned. I did not remember scanning that. I opened it. It was a letter from a predatory lending company, the kind that advertises on late-night television. It was addressed to Graham and Brenda Monroe. It was an application for a high-interest home equity line of credit. My heart hammered against my ribs. You cannot take out a line of credit on a house you do not own. The bank would reject it immediately upon a title search. But as I scrolled down the PDF, I saw why it was in my files. I had scanned it months ago from a pile of junk mail Brenda had left on the counter, intending to shred it, but I must have saved it by accident. At the time, I thought it was just a solicitation. Now, looking closer, I saw it was not a solicitation. It was a status update. Pending signature of Richardson required for finalization. I froze. They had applied. They had actually filled out the paperwork claiming ownership, or at least claiming they had the authority to leverage the asset, and the only thing that had stopped them was the bank asking for my signature. But then I saw the date on the next page. It was a handwritten note, in Brenda's distinct, loopy script, scrawled in the margin of the printed form. She is traveling. Will send proxy form by next week. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. They were not just freeloaders. They were not just emotional vampires. They had been actively attempting to commit mortgage fraud. They were trying to borrow $50,000 against my house. And they were planning to forge a proxy signature to do it. The freeloader post wasn't just an insult. It was a distraction. They wanted me out of the house not just because they hated me, but because I was the physical obstacle standing between them and a payout they desperately needed. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. The eviction notice I had just sent was too kind. They were worried about paying rent? They should have been worried about prison time. I picked up my phone. The missed calls were still piling up. I looked at the screen, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt like a prosecutor who had just found the murder weapon. If they wanted a war, they had just handed me the nuclear codes. The discovery of the loan application sat on my screen like a tumor. It was a PDF file named Modification Inquiry, but it should have been titled Attempted Grand Larceny. I forwarded the document immediately to Mr. Henderson's firm. I did not have to wait long for a response. A paralegal called me within the hour, her voice tight with professional concern. She confirmed that there had been an inquiry made 4 months ago regarding a home equity line of credit against the property at Maple Ridge. The applicants listed were Graham and Brenda Monroe, but they had listed the owner as a M. Richardson, a deliberate obfuscation that tried to blend my last name with their first initials. The application had stalled only because the lender required a notarized signature from the title holder. They had not just been living in my house, they had been trying to pawn it. I did not scream. I did not call them to scream. I treated this as I would a compliance breach at work. I preserved the metadata. I took screenshots of the file creation dates. I saved the email chain where Brenda had casually dismissed the junk mail from the bank. I was building a timeline of intent. Then, I sent a text to the family group chat. It was a single image of the loan application's signature page, where someone had practiced writing M. Richardson in wobbly cursive in the margins. I typed a simple question: who practiced my signature? The reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. Brenda was the first to reply, not with an apology, but with a pivot so sharp it would have broken a lesser woman's neck. She called me. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that started with a sob and ended with an accusation. She said that they were only trying to consolidate some bills for the family. She said they were going to pay it back before I even knew it was gone. She used the word borrow as if they had taken a cup of sugar, not $50,000 of my equity. Then Graham texted. His message was in all capital letters. How dare you accuse your mother of fraud? We built this family. He was angry, not because I was wrong, but because I had caught him. He was the patriarch whose mask had slipped, revealing the petty thief underneath. But Kayla? Kayla did not care about the bank or the fraud. Kayla cared about the audience. I watched her Facebook page in real time. She had seen my text. She knew that if I went public with the attempted fraud, her poor victim narrative would disintegrate. She began to scrub. The freeloader post disappeared first, then the comments where she had mocked my job, then the photos of her kitchen renovation. She was trying to erase the evidence of her arrogance, but the internet is written in ink, not pencil. I had everything saved. I decided it was time to correct the record. I did not write a long, emotional essay. I did not use hashtags like toxic family or healing. I simply posted 2 images side by side on my own timeline, which I had kept private until this moment. I made the post public. Image 1. A screenshot of Kayla's post. Finally, the freeloader is gone. Image 2. A redacted photograph of the deed of trust, clearly showing Madeline Richardson as the sole owner and beneficiary, dated 10 years prior. I added no caption. The silence was the weapon. I watched the notifications roll in. It started slowly. Then it became a deluge. The people who had laughed at Kayla's post, the neighbors who had liked Graham's cruelty, the cousins who had taken their side, they all saw it. The math was simple. You cannot be a freeloader in a house you own. The tide turned with violent speed. A woman named Mrs. Higgins, the president of the Maple Ridge Garden Club, commented first. Wait, Madeline owns the house? But Brenda told us you were staying there out of charity. Then a cousin from Raleigh. This is awkward. Then the apologies started landing in my inbox. People I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me, claiming they didn't know and that they always thought something was off. I did not reply to them. They were just rats jumping from one ship to another. Kayla panicked. She could not handle the loss of control. She posted a vague, tearful status update about toxic people and financial abuse, claiming that I was using money to manipulate them. But this time, the engagement was anemic. There were no hearts. There were only question marks. The audience had seen the deed, and the deed did not lie. I sat back in my chair. Feeling the adrenaline ebb away, I had exposed them. I had stopped the fraud. I thought I had seen the bottom of their deception. But late that night, as I was preparing for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot, sent by a mutual acquaintance, a girl Kayla had gone to high school with. Someone she thought was a loyal friend, but who apparently had a limit to how much hypocrisy she could stomach. The screenshot was from a private group chat Kayla was in. In the chat, Kayla was venting to her inner circle about my attack. But in her haste to play the victim, she had typed something she shouldn't have. The message read, "She is bluffing. She doesn't have the guts to kick us out. We just need to stall until next month. As long as she doesn't see the renewal paper I signed for the solar panels, we are fine." I stared at the screen. Solar panels. I did not have solar panels. the house at Maple Ridge did not have solar panels. I walked to my window and looked out at the city lights. The renewal paper I signed. They hadn't just tried to get a loan. They had entered into a long-term contract for a structural modification to the house. Solar leases were often 20-year agreements that placed a lien on the property. If Kayla had signed my name to a solar lease, she hadn't just committed fraud. She had encumbered the title of the house for 2 decades, and she had done it by forging my signature. Again. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were not just desperate. They were active parasites, burrowing deeper into the asset, signing legal documents that bound me to debts I knew nothing about. I picked up my phone and forwarded the screenshot to Mr. Henderson. It was midnight, but I did not care. The freeloader post was a joke compared to this. They had sold pieces of a house they didn't own, and they were banking on my silence to get away with it. I turned off the light, but I knew I would not sleep. The game had changed. This was no longer just about eviction. This was about criminal liability. And if Kayla thought a few deleted Facebook posts would save her from a felony charge, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson in reality. The deadline arrived on a Wednesday at midnight. It passed without a single signature on a lease agreement and without a single confirmation number for a utility transfer. They had chosen to play chicken with a woman who was no longer driving the car. They were betting on the old Madeline, the one who would apologize for taking up too much space, the one who would rather eat glass than cause an inconvenience. They were betting that I would not actually plunge them into the dark because doing so would be mean. They forgot that I was no longer operating on feelings. I was operating on a schedule. At 12:01 on Thursday morning, I logged into the customer portal for Pine State Electric. I selected the option for stop service. The reason? Vacating premises. I did the same for Blue River Gas. And finally, with a specific sense of satisfaction, I navigated to Sunline Fiber. I knew that cutting the internet would hurt Kayla more than cutting the oxygen supply to the house. She could survive without hot water, but she could not survive without an audience. I scheduled the shutoffs for 8 in the morning, then I went to sleep. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. It was 8:15. The execution had been precise. The first voicemail was from Brenda. It was not a plea, it was a shriek. She sounded like she was calling from inside a burning building. Not a luxury colonial that had simply lost its Wi-Fi signal. She screamed that I was ungrateful. She screamed that I was trying to kill them. She asked how I could do this to my own flesh and blood, but notably, she did not say the 3 words that might have paused the process. She did not say, "I am sorry." I did not answer. I made a cup of coffee and watched the second wave of panic roll in. Graham called at 8:30. I answered this one. I wanted to hear if the patriarch had found his checkbook yet. "Madeline," he said. His voice sounded thin. For the first time in my life. Graham Monroe sounded like a man who was not in charge. "The power is out. The refrigerator is off. Your mother is hysterical." "The power is out because the account holder closed the account," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "I warned you 48 hours ago. Turn it back on," he said. It was a weak command, a ghost of his former authority. "Turn it back on, and we can sit down and talk about this lease nonsense." "There is no discussion," I said. "You have 2 choices. You call Pine State Electric and open an account in your own name, which will require a deposit because of your credit score, or you pack. I am not turning it back on. I am not the customer anymore." "You are being unreasonable," he stammered. "It takes days to get a new connection." "Then you should have started 2 days ago," I said. "Good luck, Graham." I hung up. By noon, the house at Maple Ridge was effectively a tomb. Without the air conditioning running, the Carolina humidity would be seeping into the drywall. Without the internet, the smart TV was a black mirror and Kayla's career was on pause. I learned later, through the neighborhood grapevine, that they lasted exactly 4 hours in the silence. They did not go to a hotel. Hotels cost money. And Brenda was currently liquidating her dignity rather than her assets. They packed 3 large suitcases and dragged them to the car. They were retreating to Aunt Patricia's house. Patricia was Brenda's older sister, a woman who specialized in unsolicited advice and moral superiority. She lived in a cramped three-bedroom ranch on the other side of town. The image of Brenda, who prided herself on her estate, sleeping on a pull-out sofa in Patricia's cluttered den, was a poetic justice I could not have scripted better myself. Patricia called me that evening. I assumed she would be the peacekeeper, the neutral party. I was wrong. She was the flying monkey sent by the wicked witch. "Madeline," Patricia said, her voice dripping with disappointed piety, "I am looking at your mother crying in my kitchen. Do you feel good about yourself? Throwing your family onto the street?" "They are not on the street," I said calmly. "They are in your kitchen, and they are only there because they refuse to sign a lease for a house they do not own." "It is their home," Patricia argued. "They raised you there." "It is my asset," I corrected, "and they have been living there for free for a decade while I paid the taxes. Since you are so concerned about their housing, Patricia, are you volunteering to pay their $3,000 monthly rent? Or perhaps you are offering to sign the deed over to your house so they can live there permanently?" There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I don't have that kind of money," Patricia stuttered. "Then I suggest you stop lecturing the person who does," I said. "If you want to host them, that is your choice, but do not ask me to subsidize your guests." I hung up. That was the last time Patricia tried to guilt-trip me. The fallout continued to cascade like a row of dominoes. The next day, the consequences moved from the private sphere to the public one. Kayla had been in the middle of negotiating a sponsorship deal with a mid-tier athleisure brand. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to keep her in iced coffee and false eyelashes. Apparently, the brand's social media manager had seen the screenshots I posted, the deed, the freeloader caption, the reality of the situation. Kayla posted a frantic story on Instagram, filming from Patricia's dimly lit guest room, complaining about haters and sabotage. But she forgot to check her background. The room looked dingy. The lighting was bad. She looked desperate. The brand pulled the offer. They sent her a generic email about misalignment with company values, but the subtext was clear. They wanted an influencer who projected success, not one who was actively being evicted by her own sister for squatting. Kayla lost her mind. She posted a rage-filled rant about how I had ruined her career. But without the curated backdrop of my kitchen, she just looked like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum in a stranger's house. Her follower count began to drop. The audience she lived for was losing interest in the season finale of her life. Brenda fared no better. She worked as a receptionist at a high-end dental practice, a job she kept mostly for the social standing. She liked to pretend she was the office manager. I found out from a friend who used the same dentist that Brenda had been quietly asking her coworkers for short-term loans to cover banking errors. When the news of the eviction spread, and in a town like ours, it spread faster than a virus. The veneer of the wealthy Monroe family cracked. People realized that Brenda wasn't having banking errors. She was broke. She was caught in a lie about a vacation she was supposedly taking, which was actually just her hiding at Patricia's house. The office manager, a woman who had tolerated Brenda's tardiness for years, finally had enough. Brenda's hours were cut to part-time. The cash flow that supported her shopping addiction evaporated overnight. I sat in my condo, surrounded by peace and quiet. The utilities were on. The bills were paid. My conscience was clear. They were learning the hardest lesson of adulthood. You can pretend to be rich. You can pretend to be a victim. You can pretend to be the owner of the castle, but when the power company pulls the plug, the lights go out for everyone, no matter how many likes they get on Facebook. The utilities were off, but something else had been extinguished too. Their arrogance. For the first time in their lives, the Monroes were not looking down at me. They were looking up from the bottom of a hole they had dug themselves, realizing too late that I was the only one holding a ladder, and I had no intention of lowering it. The hearing took place in courtroom 4B of the County District Court. It was a room that smelled of industrial floor wax and stale anxiety. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that seemed designed to strip away human dignity. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wore a charcoal gray blazer, a white blouse, and black slacks. I carried a single leather portfolio. I did not look like a daughter. I looked like the plaintiff. My family arrived 2 minutes before the session began. They had clearly coordinated their wardrobe to project an image of wholesome, persecuted suburbanites. Brenda was wearing a pastel cardigan and a string of pearls that I knew were fake. Graham was wearing the navy suit he usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Though it was straining at the buttons around his midsection, Kayla was wearing a floral dress and flats, her hair pulled back in a modest ponytail, devoid of the heavy makeup she wore on Instagram. They looked like they were heading to a church potluck. They spotted me sitting on the wooden bench. Graham made a move to approach me. He had this look on his face, a mixture of paternal disappointment and intimidation that used to make me shrink into the floorboards when I was a child. He came and stood right next to me, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical bulk to remind me of the hierarchy. "Madeline," he whispered, his voice low and rumbled. "This has gone far enough. The judge is going to laugh you out of here. Just drop it, and we can go get lunch." I did not look up from my phone. I simply shifted my body 2 feet to the left, putting a polite but firm distance between us. I did not say a word. The silence was louder than a scream. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway walked in. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and an expression that suggested she had heard every lie ever told in the English language. She sat down, opened a file, and did not look up. Case number 49221, Richardson v. Monroe, unlawful detainer and breach of trust conditions. We moved to the tables. I stood on the right. They stood on the left. They had not hired a lawyer. Brenda had insisted they didn't need one because the truth was on their side. That was their first mistake. Judge Holloway looked at the defendants. "I see you are representing yourselves. Do you understand the proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor," Graham said, puffing out his chest. "We are just here to clear up a misunderstanding with our daughter." "Plaintiff," the judge said, turning to me, "state your claim." I stood up. I did not shake. "Your Honor, I am the sole beneficiary of the Price Family Trust, which holds the title to the property at 42 Maple Ridge Drive. The defendants were granted a revocable right of occupancy contingent upon specific conditions, maintenance of the property, payment of utilities, and conduct that does not damage the reputation of the beneficiary. They have failed on all 3 counts." I walked to the bailiff and handed him 3 manila folders. "Exhibit A," I continued, my voice steady. "The deed of trust and the beneficiary designation, proving sole ownership. Exhibit B, a copy of the certified letter sent to the defendants on January 20th, offering a lease agreement or a notice to vacate. The letter was refused. Exhibit C, proof of utility payments made solely from my personal account for the last 5 years, and proof of their disconnection due to the defendant's refusal to assume liability." Judge Holloway flipped through the pages. Her face was a mask. Brenda could not handle the silence. She burst into tears. It was a good performance. It was the same cry she used when she wanted a discount at a department store. "Your Honor," Brenda wailed, "we are her parents. We raised her in that house. We fed her. We clothed her. And now she throws us out on the street because she is having a mental breakdown." Judge Holloway looked over her glasses. "Ma'am, compose yourself. This is a court of law, not a living room." "But it's our home," Brenda sobbed. "Do you have a deed with your name on it?" the judge asked. "Well, no. But do you have a lease agreement signed by the plaintiff?" "No, because family doesn't sign leases. In this court, family is irrelevant. Contracts are relevant," the judge said. She turned back to me. "Ms. Richardson, you mentioned conduct damaging reputation?" "Yes, Your Honor." I nodded toward the file. Exhibit D. The judge looked at the screenshot of the Facebook post. Finally, the freeloader is gone. The defendants publicly labeled the property owner a freeloader. I said. This was not a private dispute. It was a public declaration that undermined my legal standing and financial reputation. Furthermore, they have attempted to use the property to secure loans without my consent. Graham slammed his hand on the table. That is a lie. We never took out a loan. You applied for one, I said, looking straight ahead at the judge. And you listed yourselves as owners. Kayla stood up then. She had been tapping her foot nervously the entire time. She could not stand the fact that the narrative was slipping away from them. She needed to regain control. She is lying, Kayla shouted, pointing a finger at me. She is just jealous. She wants to humiliate us because she has no friends and no life. She wouldn't dare actually kick us out. She is just doing this for attention. The courtroom went quiet. Kayla's words hung in the air. She wouldn't dare. It was the slip I was waiting for. It proved that they did not view this as a legal proceeding. They viewed it as a bluff. They did not respect my authority. They were betting on my cowardice. Your Honor, I said softly, I have one final piece of evidence regarding the defendant's respect for the property rights. I handed a single sheet of paper to the bailiff. It was the screenshot of the text message Kayla had sent to her friend group the night before. She is bluffing. She doesn't have the guts to kick us out. We just need to stall until next month. As long as she doesn't see the renewal paper I signed for the solar panels, we are fine. The bailiff handed it to the judge. Judge Holloway read it. Her eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. She looked from the paper to Kayla. Ms. Monroe, the judge said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. Did you sign a contract for solar panel installation on a property you do not own? Kayla froze. Her face went pale. It was a good deal. It increases the value of the home. Did you sign the owner's name? The judge asked. Kayla stammered. I signed as a resident. It's the same thing. It is most certainly not the same thing, the judge snapped. That is forgery, and it is fraud. Brenda stopped crying instantly. Graham slumped in his chair. They knew. In that second, they knew the family defense was dead. They weren't fighting a daughter anymore. They were fighting a paper trail. Judge Holloway closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot. I have seen enough, she said. The defense has admitted to forgery in open court. The plaintiff has provided irrefutable proof of ownership and a clear violation of the trust's terms. The freeloader comments, while petty, are the least of your problems. She looked at Graham and Brenda. You have treated this court, and this plaintiff, with a staggering lack of respect. You seem to believe that biology grants you immunity from the law. It does not. She banged the gavel. Judgment for the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to vacate the property immediately. The request for eviction is granted. Furthermore, I am flagging the transcript of this hearing regarding the solar lease admission for the district attorney's office to review for potential criminal charges. Graham looked like he was going to vomit. Kayla looked at her phone, as if hoping a filter could fix reality. I stood up. I did not smile. I did not look at them. I collected my papers and placed them back in my portfolio. As I turned to leave, Brenda grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, her nails digging into my blazer. Madeline, she hissed, her eyes wild. You ruined us. You actually ruined us. I looked at her hand until she let go. No, Mother, I said. I just turned on the lights. You are the ones who wrecked the room. I walked out of the courtroom. The air in the hallway felt different. It was not just the air of victory. It was the air of finality, but I knew it wasn't quite over. There was one last thing to do, one last document that Walter Price had left for me, the one in the sealed envelope that I had never opened until this morning. The judge had given me the house back, but Grandfather Walter was about to tell me what to do with it. The hallway outside the courtroom was cold, echoing with the sound of frantic whispers and the squeak of rubber soles on tile. The bailiff had given them 24 hours to vacate the premises completely, a generous window considering the fraud Judge Holloway had just uncovered. Brenda was waiting for me near the elevators. Her mascara was running, creating dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. She looked smaller than she ever had in my life, like a balloon that had finally lost its air. When she saw me, she lunged, grabbing my wrist with a grip that was desperate and trembling. "You ruined me," she hissed, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You ruined your own mother. How do you sleep at night?" I looked at her hand on my arm. Years ago, that touch would have paralyzed me. It would have sent me spiraling into guilt, begging for forgiveness, promising to fix whatever mess she had created. But today, it just felt like a stranger was touching me. I gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off my sleeve. "I did not ruin you, Mother," I said, my voice calm enough to startle her. "You ruined yourself the moment you decided you needed an audience more than you needed a daughter." I walked into the elevator and let the doors close on her face. That was the last time I saw her as my mother. From that moment on, she was just a defendant in a closed case. I drove straight to Mr. Henderson's office. There was one final piece of business to attend to. When I sat down in the leather chair across from him, he pulled a thick, yellowed envelope from his safe. It was the dead man's switch Walter Price had mentioned in his will. I opened it. Inside, there was no legal jargon. There was just a handwritten letter on stationery that smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. "My dear Madeline, if you are reading this, it means they finally pushed you too far. I am sorry I could not be there to see you stand up for yourself. But I knew this day would come. Brenda loves things, not people, and Graham loves comfort, not work. They will try to turn my house into a stage for their vanity, and they will try to make you feel like a guest in your own inheritance. Do not let them. If they have broken the trust, sell the house. Do not keep it for sentiment. A house infected by their greed will never be a home. Take the money and build a life they cannot touch. Love, Grandfather." I sat in the quiet office and let the tears fall. Walter had known. He had predicted every move, every manipulation, every attempt to leverage the asset. He had given me the house not as a gift, but as a test. And finally, as a ticket out, the following day, I went to Maple Ridge to oversee the final walkthrough. I brought a security guard, just in case, but the house was empty. They had fled in the night, stripping the place of anything not nailed down. I walked through the rooms. The walls were marked where pictures had hung. The carpets were indented where heavy furniture had sat. It felt hollow. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like walking through the wreckage of a plane crash where I was the sole survivor. In the kitchen, I found the last remnant of their delusion. On the counter, buried under a pile of junk mail they had left behind, was the hard copy of the solar lease agreement. I picked it up. Kayla had signed Madeline Richardson with a little heart over the I. She had signed away 20 years of equity for a system she didn't understand, all to impress neighbors she didn't like. I handed the paper to the security guard to bag as evidence. "Add this to the file for the district attorney," I said. I did not move back in. I did not paint the walls or try to reclaim the space. Walter was right. The soil was poisoned. I listed the house on the market 3 days later, because the market in Charlotte was aggressive. It sold in 48 hours to a young couple from Ohio who knew nothing of the Monroes or their drama. They just saw a beautiful colonial with good bones. I signed the closing papers and walked away with a check for $540,000. I did not buy a mansion. I did not buy a sports car. I did exactly what I had been doing for years. I was boring. I set up a limited liability company to protect my assets. I hired a top-tier accountant. I put the maximum amount allowed into my retirement accounts. And I spent money on the one thing my family never believed in: therapy. I spent months unlearning the word freeloader. I paid a professional to help me dismantle the voice in my head that sounded like Brenda. The voice that told me I was taking up too much space. It was the best investment I ever made. As for the Monroes, their downfall was as public as their lifestyle had been. Kayla tried to pivot her brand to overcoming family trauma, but the internet has a long memory. Every time she posted a video about toxic relatives, someone would comment with a link to the court records or a screenshot of the freeloader post. She could not outrun the truth. Her follower count dwindled until she eventually set her account to private and took a job as a receptionist at a car dealership. Brenda lost her job at the dental office. The rumors about the fraud and the loans were too much for a business that relied on trust. I heard through the grapevine that she was working retail at the mall, selling overpriced candles to women who reminded her of who she used to be. Graham simply faded away. He stopped going to the country club. He stopped trying to be the patriarch. He became what he always was, a shadow following Brenda, looking for a place to sit. People sometimes ask me if I regret it. They ask if I miss having a family. I tell them that I do have a family. I have the memory of a grandfather who loved me enough to give me a weapon. I have a circle of friends who know me for my work, not my utility to them. I have a life that is quiet, solvent, and entirely my own. The last time I drove past the exit for Maple Ridge, I didn't even look at the sign. I didn't break my family. They were broken long before I handed them the eviction notice. I simply stopped being the glue that held their shattered pieces together. I stopped shielding them from the gravity of their own choices. And now, when I unlock the door to my condo, the silence isn't heavy. It isn't waiting for an insult. It doesn't wait for a demand. It is just silence. And it is the most expensive, luxurious thing I own. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether you think Madeline went too far, or if she did exactly what she needed to do. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just living well.